Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the Marion Minor Cook Athenaeum. We're so pleased to have you all here and joining us online for a really fantastic and wonderful event with 3 distinguished guests for the first annual Dreier Roundtable Civility Award and a bipartisan conversation on the future of American political parties. But before I get started on these exciting announcements, we have 3 things that we'd like you to keep in mind for our COVID and health and safety policies. So per our guidelines, number 1, please keep your mask on properly over your nose and your mouth for the entirety of the program indoors. So because of this, if you would like to take a drink, you may actually step outside of the Egger Dining Hall. The exit is behind you. And then our second announcement is for questions.
I'm really glad to be on the program.
Yeah. We're so happy to have you here. So then for our questions for our guests, we will actually be taking them both in person and on the live broadcast on Zoom. For Zoom guests, please make sure to state your affiliation with the college. And for those of you here in person, feel free to take out a notepad if you have any questions that you'd like to ask at the end. Lastly, please take this time to silence and put away our lovely cell phones. So go ahead and reach into those bags, just double check, because there is always one scenario. So please make sure that you are not taking any video or audio recordings by the audience, as they are strictly prohibited. And now, moving on to the exciting part. So tonight, I believe we're all aware of the immense rancor in politics these days. It doesn't take more than 30 seconds on MSNBC, Fox News, CNN to discover that, or maybe about 10 minutes on my Twitter feed. So while we may not agree with each other, what we have a commitment to at CMC and as global citizens is to be compassionate and respectful in discourse in solving the world's issues, even though we come from different backgrounds, identities, and experiences. An exemplar of this commitment is CMC's Dreier Roundtable, which is actually founded by one of our distinguished guests tonight, and it is a public policy program for students committed to civil and respectful discourse to solve many of the issues we face today. Now, the Dreier Roundtable is sponsoring our event tonight, and we have our distinguished guest and alumnus and trustee, Congressman David Dreier, who is the founder and joining us tonight. He is one of the longest serving members of elected congressional leadership. In fact, he lived in Phillips Hall when he won his party's nomination to go to Congress. An achievement that I can honestly, yes, applause for that. Current residents of Phillips Hall, take this as your challenge. I expect all of this by the end of this year. So we are lucky to have notable politicians such as Congressman Dreier, who argued for their party, their issues, and were respected by those who disagreed because they rose above the base, most divisive approach to politics. Upon leaving Congress after 33 years, he became a distinguished fellow at the Brookings Institution and chairman of Tribune Publishing, one of the nation's largest media companies. Tonight, the Dreier Roundtable's first Civility Award will be presented by Congressman Dreier. The award recognizes public servants who engage in spirited debate to resolve those divisive issues. And tonight, our guest, Governor Bullock, is an alumnus, a parent, an inaugural honoree who will be recognized by Congressman Dreier as a leader who engages in civil discourse and outreach. And also, special shout out to the Athenaeum, former Athenaeum server, we love that. Finally, the two will sit down for a conversation with Jack Pitney, who needs no introduction at the colleges, of course. Roy P. Crocker Professor of Politics, notable for his knowledge and commentary on all things political. And we are going to be discussing the future of political parties in the United States. So please give a really warm welcome to our fantastic guest for tonight.
Okay. Thank you very much, Maya. Let me begin by expressing appreciation to Priya and David and all those who've done so much better than Steve Bullock ever did when he was working as a server here. So let's give a round of applause to everybody here. Thank you, Priya, for all that you made happen. And the second thing I'd like to do is extend congratulations to everyone associated with, in any way, with the institution that has the greatest amount of free speech in the entire country. And that's exactly what FIRE has just announced, and I want to give all of you a great round of applause. As I've talked to people tonight, the kind of civil discourse that's been going on is absolutely very, very, very admirable, and so many people have talked about the fact that they have not been able to see the same kinds of things take place on the campus. So FIRE, President Chodosh, stands for the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. And so give CMC a great round of applause for being the center of free speech for this country. "75 years ago, the 38-year-old grandson of the first president of Pomona College founded CMC, George C.S. Benson, George Charles Sumner Benson. And he had a very simple four-word motto for CMC. Cresca cum commercio civitas. Civilization prospers with commerce. Those four words. And contrary to critics, it's not just about the money. Commerce improves standards of living and quality of life and needs to be recognized. There are not many colleges that would have that as its motto. The mission, exactly double the size of the motto, 8 words. Foster leadership in business, government, and the professions. That was the vision 75 years ago put forth by President George C.S. Benson and the people who established this great place. I'm very proud that my father graduated from here, and I'm proud to be the first son of a graduate of CMC. And I had other options of places to go. My father said, please look at this small school. I was in the Midwest, and it was probably one of the best decisions that I have ever made in my entire life. I can't imagine a better place to go to school than CMC, and I know that that doesn't come, what I just said, as a surprise to any of you, because as I went around and sat at most all of the tables this evening, virtually every single one of you said that. So I congratulate you, and I hope that every day you'll have ups and downs, but I hope that you realize how fortunate you are to be here. And I believe that as we look at public service, government service, we basically have a 3-word mission statement for the Dreier Roundtable. That is, inspire public service. That's what we're all about. It was one of the first initiatives that President Chodosh put into place right after he became president, establishing the Roundtable. And over the years, we've done some very important work on the issues of political polarization, the development of democratic institutions, free trade and immigration. We partnered with Brookings and other think tanks to do that. And now we have embarked on a whole new era that is, to me, very exciting. We talk about freedom of expression and how important that is with the Open Academy. Well, one of the things after we went through a difficult time 4 years ago, as did campuses across the country where free speech was being blocked, I said one of the things we need to do is have Oxford-style debates. So there can't be any criticism with people actually on both sides of an issue will have an equal opportunity to express their ideas on public policy questions and societal questions that we have. And so I'm particularly pleased to announce that while Jack Pitney is the co-director of the Dreier Roundtable, along with Terrell Jones, we're very, very pleased to be able to welcome Professor Michael Fortner, who's in the back here. Why don't you stand up and be recognized, Michael, since I proudly went to Gov 20 my first year, and I'm going to be going back to Gov 20 next Tuesday when I go to Professor Fortner's class to talk about Edmund Burke and the juxtaposition of direct versus representative democracy. So that's the charge that I've been given. So I'm looking forward to doing that next Tuesday afternoon. And I have to say that on October 20th, there is going to be a debate on the future of policing the question posed, do we need police? And Professor Fortner is putting this together, and it's going to take place right here, I guess, on October 20th. And so we're very pleased to be part of that. And Maya nicely mentioned the fact that when I left the Congress, I got into the media and newspaper business. And I feel that journalists are actually public servants too. Getting to know as many journalists as I had, it's easy to criticize them, and we all know that I can tell horror stories about misprints and things. But the fact of the matter is, journalists are on the front line in many, many difficult situations. And so I consider that to really be part of our effort. And so Professor Jones and Professor Pitney have done a phenomenal job putting together an op-ed writing contest. And that is open, and we are continuing to do that. And we look forward to giving out awards for the op-ed writing. I also want to say that it was 50 years ago this month that Harry McMahon, the Chairman Emeritus of our Board of Trustees, and Carrie Davidson, and Jeff Klein and I enrolled as freshmen here. It was 50 years ago this month that I enrolled as a freshman here. And I think back on the early experiences. I didn't even know, I'd seen pictures, I didn't even know there were mountains here. The smog was so bad, and I was on the tennis court. The only time in my life I fainted, I collapsed. And on the tennis court here. And I was telling Governor Bullock earlier today, I was very proud to have worked on the Clean Air Act and the development of that, public-private partnership. And now, when I came, I live on the other side of Los Angeles now, and when I came out to see the beautiful mountains here in Claremont, it's just so exciting to be back. And after everything we've endured over the last 18 months, I've got to say that it's so wonderful for all of us to have an opportunity to be together again. I also want to say that a liberal arts education extends beyond just a particular area of interest. And Governor Bullock and I were talking about this earlier too. It's difficult to imagine that, very difficult to imagine today serving in public office without having a really good grasp and understanding of science, technology, education, and math. So I want to extend congratulations to President Chodosh for everything that he is doing for the expansion of integrated sciences that is taking place here. And so could we all give President Chodosh a great round of applause for that? And thank you for doing that. People like to make fun of public servants, and I'm one of them. It's very easy to do that. Thomas Jefferson wanted the American people to be skeptical of their elected leaders. One of my real concerns is that we've gone from a healthy Jeffersonian skepticism to a corrosive cynicism in society today, and especially as it relates to public servants. And I've talked about the Oxford-style debates, the op-ed writing contest, but I left Congress 8 years ago by choice, I'm happy to say. One of my colleagues came back one time and said, well, I left Congress for health reasons. The voters got sick of me. But I actually am happy to say that I left by choice. And it is easy to poke fun at people. I mean, you know, people, Will Rogers looked at a 7-year-old boy one time and said, now you make sure you study hard, young man, so you won't grow up to be a congressman. And people like to say, I'm for term limits for members of Congress. 2 in Congress, 2 in prison. You know, those kinds of things. And I can be even-handed about that, of course, though, to make sure we're all represented. You know about the 2 guys who were sitting in prison. One leaned to the other and said, you know, the food was a heck of a lot better in here when you were governor. So we obviously are in not the most respected field in the world, but to me, it is one of the most important. So I've watched the diminution of the level of debate in Congress, and I said sadly a few years ago to President Chodosh and other colleagues, we need to recognize people who engage in civil discourse, people who can disagree without being disagreeable. So we were able to cobble together a very, very rigorous debate among Professor Jones, Professor Fortner, Professor Pitney. We had a knockdown, drag-out fight, and I was able to prevail in the selection of Governor Steve Bullock over much protest. But actually, needless to say, it was unanimous. And I said, we need to recognize people who have been able to have success in challenging circumstances. Steve Bullock was the governor of Montana with a legislature that was at one point 2/3 Republican. The Democratic governor with a legislature that was 2/3 Republican. And yet he left the state with a great surplus. He brought about major Medicaid reform, brought the Republicans along to that. And he also did campaign finance reform. And so there are a number of issues that he was able to engage in. And it's not to say that you all have to come to an agreement on everything, but you can do it in a respectful manner. So it saddens me that our society today needs to present a civility award. It saddens me that what we see in Steve Bullock is the exception rather than the rule. I mean, this country has had a history of people being less than civil. I mean, July 11th, 1804, we all know very famously the Vice President of the United States shot the former Treasury Secretary, Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton. And then in 1856, Senator Charles Sumner was beaten to within an inch of his life on the floor of the United States Senate by a congressman called Preston Brooks from South Carolina. Preston Brooks will not ever be a recipient of our Civility Award, mark my words. And then I like to tell the one about in 1890, because any of you who've been in the U.S. Capitol, you will see on the steps going from the second floor to the first floor, right by the members' dining room, there are big black splotches on the steps. And they've never been able to get them up. On the 28th of February in 1890, there was a congressman called William Talby from Kentucky. And he had a reporter, Charles Kincaid, write nasty articles about him, saying he was on the take, had affairs, all this sort of stuff. So they really went at it. And Congressman Talby had left the Congress, but he grabbed this reporter, and the reporter shot Congressman Talby dead right on the steps. And as I said, if you ever go to the Capitol, you'll still see the blood from 1890 still on those steps. So my point is, we haven't had a nation that has always engaged in civil discourse, but those things were the exception rather than the rule. I was one time shoved against the wall because I allowed one of my staff members to go to Cuba. A Cuban-American member did that to me. That's the worst that I ever saw, although I heard there were a few other little battles. But it used to be that we could work together. When I left the Congress, I had more friends who were Democrats than Republicans. And now we have seen, as Maya explained, that what we're doing tonight is really the exception, recognizing people who do the right thing. And so I want to say that I am particularly proud to be able to announce that Steve Bullock is going to be the first recipient of our annual Civility Award. And I also want to say that he has just agreed he is going to be the new chairman of the Dreier Roundtable, our effort as we go forward. And he and I are going to co-chair an effort. We hope to have student input, and Professors Pitney and Jones and Fortner will all be involved in the process of selecting the next recipient of the Civility Award. So with that, I'm very proud to present the inaugural Civility Award to my good friend, member of the class of '88, father of Caroline, class of '24, Steve Bullock.
Oh, very cool. Thank you.
There we go.
Thank you very much.
Go get him. Go get him.
Well, it's a real honor and a personal pleasure to be here because, in the first instance, because I've known both of these folks for a very long time. I first met Chairman Dreier when I was working for Congressman Jerry Lewis, who literally represented the next district over. I mean, you could walk to his district in those days. And I've known Governor Bullock since I came to CMC. He took my presidency class in the spring of 1987. he wrote a paper about Joe Biden. Fortunately, I don't
Did
think
you find that paper? Because I actually remember the paper.
Yeah, it was really good.
No.
He also wrote his senior thesis for me, and of course, in his capacity as a CMC parent, Caroline was in my Gov 20 class last year. But more significant than that, because we have two people here who embody the CMC way, embody the spirit of civility, of engaging in spirited discussion of the issues in an atmosphere of genuine friendship, atmosphere of good cheer. That's the CMC way. That is embedded in our DNA. That's the way we do things here. So this is very much an ultimate CMC moment. And as Chairman Dreier mentioned, the timing could not be better because, as he mentioned, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education released its campus free speech ratings. We are the #1 college in the United States. Let me quote from the report. Quote, among liberal arts colleges, CMC overwhelmed its closest competitor, Bowdoin College, by almost 10 points. In fact, for each component of the rankings, CMC ranked in the top 50, having the top score on both tolerance for liberal speakers and tolerance for conservative speakers. And if you've been at CMC as long as I have, that comes as absolutely no surprise. That is the CMC way. That is the institution that we are at and that we are dedicated to. So with that, let me begin our discussion here. We're going to talk about political parties and civility and the future of American politics. So I invite both of you just to explain, Chairman Dreier, why you're a Republican, and Governor Bullock, why you're a Democrat.
Go ahead.
You have the harder role now.
Yeah,
at this
no,
point.
I know. No, you don't have to explain it. I mean, I should take the whole program because I can't justify my existence. You know, so, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, like probably decided sometime when I was sitting where you are that I was a Democrat. You know, my family wasn't real political, but I'm a Democrat because there's this lottery of birth, right? Or the lottery of life shouldn't determine one's destiny. Meaning none of us have a choice of who our parents are, what zip code we're raised in. But if you work hard and you play by the rules, everybody ought to have that fair shot at what I always viewed as the American dream of doing better than your parents. And I think that the Democratic Party has traditionally and still does more encapsulate that. Now that doesn't mean advancing equality of outcome, but it's advancing equality of opportunity and recognizing that government has a role in making sure that everybody has that fair shot.
So Governor Bullock has just explained why I'm a Republican. And so let me say that when I think about where it is that the Republican Party is going, I think that probably the single best thing that we can do as a party to succeed is to make sure that Steve Bullock is not the Democratic nominee for President of the United States. And I say that because I believe that I'm a Republican for 4 simple reasons. I believe in a free economy, a humble government, a strong, cost-effective national defense, and personal freedom. And obviously, I totally concur. I want to create opportunity for everyone. And as a Republican, my concern is that the massive expansion of the nanny state undermines the opportunity about which Governor Bullock has just spoken. Now, I describe myself, it's, you know, you have to do that. I'm a big believer in the vision that the first Republican president put forward. I mean, the greatest president of our country was Abraham Lincoln. And I'm proud that the flagship paper of the company that I led, the Chicago Tribune, endorsed him in February of 1860, making 4 points. Abraham Lincoln was endorsed because of his intellect, his honesty, his firmness, and his patriotism. And that's the basis on which, my party was founded. That vision, and we all know that opportunity for everyone is exactly what Abraham Lincoln aspired to and wanted for the American people. And President Chodosh and I know this as we looked at the issue of political polarization and the work that the Roundtable has done in the past. The single most polarizing president in our nation's history was Abraham Lincoln, as we all know. And so I look and I move forward, and Maya mentioned my living at Phillips Hall. The fact is, one of the first people who encouraged me to run for Congress was Ronald Reagan, and I had such regard for his optimism. I didn't agree with Ronald Reagan on every public policy issue, but Reagan had this great line. He said, show me somebody who disagrees with me 20% of the time, and I'll show you somebody who agrees with me 80% of the time. And that was the view, and that was the basis for the Republican Party that I became part of. The challenge that I've had, and frankly I've just anguished and I've tried to decide where to go. Ronald Reagan famously said, I didn't leave the Democratic Party, they left me. Well, I have to say that the Republican Party that I see today is not the Republican Party that brought me to, I could not get elected to Congress today as a Republican with the views that I have on immigration, on international trade, on a wide range of issues. So I struggle with trying to determine where to go forward. I mean, you don't mind my mentioning what you did election night 2016. Jack Pitney, he mentioned that he worked for my Republican colleague, Jerry Lewis. And by the way, I will say, even though I graduated before Jack got here, like everyone else, I'm fortunate to consider myself, and he doesn't eschew me when I say I'm a student of Jack Pitney's. Jack Pitney dropped his Republican registration and became your independent, he's a registered independent. I thought long and hard about doing that. I had friends who encouraged me. My friend Maria Shriver, who's a Kennedy, left the Democratic Party. And so she was trying to get me to do the same thing, leave the Republican Party to become independent. And I've considered it, and I've anguished over it. And as I see the campaign process that's going on, as I look at I literally thank God every single day that I'm no longer in Congress. But I want you all to go. Not right now, but I do want you all to go. Because it disappoints me that Steve Bullock is the only governor to graduate from CMC, and I'm the only member of the United States Congress. My first conversation with him, he'd run for the Senate, I said, I hate you. My first conversation with him, because I was looking forward to passing that mantle of a CMC or going into the Congress. So we need to get honest, ethical, hardworking people to do that, So I'm wearing a purple tie because I don't know if I'm red or blue. I'm a passionate Lincoln, Reagan Republican, libertarian-leaning Republican, and I hope and dream, I like to say that I'm a big believer in the two-party system, and my wildest dream is that the Republican Party just might be one of those two parties, because there's a lot of uncertainty for the future.
We've got a big tent, Congressman. Come on over.
So that's just one quick story. A quick story that I will say is I got to be President Clinton's token Republican, and I went as the only Republican on an 8-day mission with him in Latin America, and we were in Buenos Aires, and Clinton and Madeleine Albright got me into the corner after a meeting that we had, and they both pitched me to do what you just did. And I looked at President Clinton, and I said, Mr. President, I think that probably the best thing I can do for the Democratic Party is to create a viable, measured, thoughtful Republican Party. And the President of the United States looked to me and said, you're absolutely right.
Well, speaking of the future, again, knowing you and both of you CMC alums, CMC has changed along with lots of colleges when both of you were here. we tended to be predominantly Republican. Steve, I remember that very vividly. And now college students nationwide and in CMC as well have been trending Democratic. And just want to see why you think that happened, particularly among young people, and what each party can do about it, what Democrats can do to maintain the loyalty of younger people, and what Republicans can do to change that trend.
You first. So you could go back to the first Bush president. He said, you know, it's warming up around here. He said, we're going to address the greenhouse effect with the White House effect. Here was a Republican president saying, climate change is real and we got to do something about it. Then you went through literally decades where I don't think on two hands you could find members of Congress that were Republicans that would even acknowledge that climate is impacted by human activity. You look at where I started saying, right, everybody should be able to do better than their parents. Top 10% of our country controls 70% of the wealth. Yours will be the first generation. Like when I was growing up, 90% of 30-year-olds were doing better than their parents at 30. Yours is looking like the first that you won't be doing better than your parents. Look, if ages 18 to 30 voted at the same level as 60 and up, you would decide every single election. Mm-hmm. And I think in some respects, and especially more recently when look, the Democratic Party has its own challenges, but there's at least facets of the current Republican Party, and I'll say the current Republican Party is 5 or 6 years in now, where young folks are like, well, where do I fit in? And how are they talking about making my life better? So I think that, fortunately, probably more so than when I was a student or when Congressman Dreier was a student, that younger people are realizing that their voice matters. They can impact things like climate, their voice on gun safety, and the identification of what I'd like to think is that not only can I take that energy, but this is a party that might actually be fighting to make sure that my life is better in the future, is part of what the identification is.
So again, Steve has covered a lot of what I would say as far as what Republicans need to do to attract young people. I mentioned in my opening remarks about air quality here. I used to say to Republicans 15 years ago, okay, you want to deny climate change? Okay, so rather than denying it, let's still do the things that will allow us to address climate change, and that is work to improve air quality, drinking water. I mean, believe it or not, Republicans like to breathe clean air and drink clean water. I mean, Republicans actually like to do that. So we needed to focus on those things, and then that could address it. Obviously, I mean, Steve said two hands. I mean, it's one of the reasons I left the Congress with more friends who were Democrats than Republicans. I did go against, many, many deaf ears on this. And so it is tough. So as far as attracting young people, along with realizing that climate change is something that needs to be addressed in a very bipartisan way. It is a global challenge, and I don't know the exact extent to which human behavior is responsible for this, but again, taking the steps to deal with it will clearly improve our environment overall. So I think we could come to a bipartisan agreement on that. The second thing is, and I don't think we've even uttered the name of the last president of the United States, but I want to say that one of the things that I think would play a role in attracting young people to the Republican Party is for the Republican Party to eschew the nativism that we have seen take place in the debate, not just in the last 4 years, but I will say it was a really big part of what gave me some difficult re-elections. I would very easily get re-elected, and yet this is an actual story of something that happened to me, and it's very disturbing, and this was probably 15 years ago. I was in San Dimas here, and at some fair, the things that we in politics do, and a very nice couple with 2 or 3 children came up to me and said, "I've got the answer to the illegal immigration problem." I said, "I'm all ears, let's go for it." And this guy looked at me and he said, "If you will gun down a few young families at the border, that word will spread throughout and they won't come to the border." And I looked at this guy and I said, "You're sick." And the guy said to me, "You're obviously not committed to our nation's security." Mm-hmm. And so this kind of attitude, and remember Ronald Reagan in 1986 put into place the last so-called amnesty bill. And so that was a Republican initiative. So we need to deal with this issue of nativism, this whole idea of people sticking their heads in the sand. And I think what the Republican Party needs to do is the Republican Party needs to have an internal debate. Are they going to pursue this populist route, or are they going to pursue the traditional libertarian conservative route? An internal debate for Republicans to have would be a very healthy, good, and right thing. I believe that they need to have it. I will say this, and Steve hasn't mentioned it. He's exuding the image of the Democratic Party today. And I will tell you that Steve Bullock is not my former colleague Bernie Sanders. Steve Bullock is not Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Well, the Democratic Party has the challenge of dealing with that situation. And so I would say that young people today are not proponents of perpetuating the nanny state, which is exactly as they look at overtaxing, overregulating, they are doing. And they are driving so much of what's taking place back in Washington today. And I will say that Republicans do make a mistake in constantly winning just by pointing at the weaknesses of Democrats. Whatever you want to say about the 1994 contract with America, at least was a 10-point positive vision put forward. It was actually 60% of it was signed into law by Democratic President Bill Clinton at the time. So I think that Republicans, who most likely will win the majority in the next election in the House of Representatives, still should put forward a positive platform. The Republican Party is known by the acronym GOP. That stands for Grand Old Party. But when I was a kid, my dad told me that GOP stands for growth, opportunity, and progress. That's why I'm always hard-pressed to cede the term progressive to the left. Just as I don't like ceding the term nationalist to the left. I say I'm a globalist because I'm a nationalist. And so I think that using issues like that to draw in and attract support can in fact bring young people back to a new Republican Party.
Can I just add one quick thing too, though, because Professor Pitney alluded to it. Yeah, when I was at Claremont, I'll never forget being in political philosophy class and someone saying, the professor saying, "Montana, you're our token Democrat. What do you think?" Yeah. And if you go back to where we spoke about the fire, that it was a pretty darn conservative campus. But I also never felt like, even though I had different views than most of the student body, that those views were rejected. So to the extent that
they told me they all hated you.
That too. Yeah. They actually gave to me more Republicans than Democrats.
I love it.
You guys had more
Yep.
money.
Yep.
So to the extent that you're a conservative, be open and have discussions about that. Because also one of the things that helped me sort of clarify my views weren't talking to people that all agreed with me, but often listening and talking to people that I didn't agree with. And we were able to do that in a respectful way.
And In his acknowledgments to to his senior thesis, he thanked me for, quote, intellectual challenge. Direct quotation.
Love it.
I think the only Democrat on the political science department taught like comparative English or the British parliamentary system, so I had to take Professor Pitney.
And you live to tell about it.
Final question I'll ask before we go to the to audience questions. Both of you have extensive experience in working with the other side. Congressman Dreier, much of your career unfolded under a Democratic majority in the House. You were governor of a predominantly Republican state, Republican legislature. What would you say to members of Congress right now? We have potential for default, potential for government shutdown. People on both sides aren't willing to give. What is the advice you would give to members of Congress right now?
Well, the advice that I would give to everyone in Washington, D.C. is aspire to the award that Steve Bullock has just gotten. And we know what it is about, and that is engaging in civil discourse as you try to find solutions to public policy questions that exist today. Right now, the big debate is over the debt ceiling increase. And it's always a political football. Not a single Republican will vote to increase the debt ceiling. And, but when Republicans are in charge, there's a Republican president, every Republican, the Democrats oppose it. Today, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, as he's looking at tapering, basically reducing the level of bond purchases, talked about the fact the debt ceiling has to be raised. It would be wonderful if there could be a realization as that. The reason, by the way, that the Republicans are not doing it is the $3.5 trillion spending and the fact that we've not seen any kind of restraint on spending. But if we could see, again, an agreement there on some spending levels, maybe we could come to an agreement on things like the debt ceiling increase. So again, I mean, what I began with, the award that Governor Bullock has just received is something that it'd be nice to have people in Congress aspire to, and if they get it, they'll be able to resolve lots of these things.
Yeah, I think the advice, look, there's a lot of broken things about the system. I think campaign finance, I think media is now by and large broken. It makes it disincentives to actually figure out how to work together. I mean, I think it is pretty troubling that when we talk about the debt ceiling, as an example, that, yeah, not one Republican will vote for it, yet we're fine voting for it for the last 4 years.
When not one Democrat would vote for it either at that same time.
And during that 4-year period, $23,500 more of debt was put on every living person in the US under the 4 years of the Trump administration. I'll never forget, so when we moved into the governor's residence, my kids were 6, 8, and 10. It's the youngest in 40 years of kids being part of that governor's bubble. And our son Cam, he kicks a soccer ball, it bounces off this painting, and the residence manager says, you know, that painting's worth $100,000. And I'm like, well, then take down all the damn paintings, right? Because we got to live here. Yeah. The kids can't live in a museum. But in my first State of the State, I talked about that. And I said the sounds you're going to hear are a little bit different from the governor's residence of the office. The sounds will be of kids, and it should be our reminder that we need to act like our kids are watching and learning from our words and deeds, because they are. And ultimately, we'll be judged not by the pundits, but we'll be judged by that next generation. If we could ingrain anything right now in the political dysfunction, it'd be to make folks think not about the food fight or political fight of today, but what are we going to do for tomorrow, for that next generation? And when we can do that, it's good to have a two-party system. I get that. It's a luxury for us to talk about politics, right? Most people's lives they're worried about, is my car going to break down? Is my kid going to get sick? The values that people hold, though, everybody wants a safe community, a decent job, roof over their head, clean air, clean water, good schools. I believe you can do better for your kids and grandkids and yourself. Like, the values that we share are so much closer than what's really divides us. Your Reagan's 80-20 rule.
Absolutely.
And if we could ever start thinking about not just the next election, but what we're doing for the next generation, or even a decade from now, I think we'd all be in a better place.
And that's why our mission is very simple with everyone in this room: inspire public service. I mean, we really, really need you all to step up to the plate and take on these challenges, because I'm convinced that with a CMC education, there is no one in this country better equipped than graduates of this place.
Well, that is an appropriate segue to audience questions.
Fantastic. There we go. Fantastic. Can everyone please give a massive round of applause for that insightful? Thank you so much for that truly insightful discussion, and one that I think gives a lot of hope to everyone in this room and watching on Zoom. Hello. So now we will be taking questions from both Zoom and the live audience. So for the questions from the audience, you are welcome to come up to a microphone, which I will place here, and we will have 3 to 4 people line up by the mic. No more than 3 to 4, just because of time constraints and social distancing. So if you have a question, you are free to go ahead and line up, and then I will let you know when you can ask. When you ask your question, please make sure you're maintaining 6 feet distancing in the line. And also feel free to introduce yourself, your name, your year, your major, and who you would like to direct your question to. All right, are there any questions about that? No? Okay, perfect. Then feel free to ask questions.
My question, well, my name's Gabe. I'm a senior at CMC. My question is for Congressman Dreier. You encouraged us as students to run for office. I'm just wondering, why should we do that when politicians are constantly attacked politically and criticized, and it seems like it's a stressful job that's kind of unappealing.
So, I mean, it's a great question, and it's one that I think about a lot myself, because what is it I said? I said, I thank God every day that I'm not there at this moment, and that's why I said at this moment. I mean, I regularly will have people, we were joking earlier about, oh, we missed you so much, you know, all of this sort of stuff. And people will say that. I was quipping that I was on the west side of LA, and a stranger came up to me and waved his finger in my face and said, you know, I tolerated you. I said, well, I take that as a great compliment, you know. I mean, the fact that somebody tolerated me on the other side of town here. It's about the future. I mean, we both are talking about that. The reason that Steve Bullock and David Dreier are here, the raison d'etre for the Dreier Roundtable, is that we're looking to the future. So I agree with you. It's not easy. I mean, it is not easy. It is tough, but it's very, very important. In 2005, I established this bipartisan commission in Congress called the House Democracy Partnership. We focused on building the parliaments in 21 new and re-emerging democracies all across the globe. And we wanted to share our experience with them. And there is, throughout the world, still to this day, a great regard and respect for not only the United States of America, but for the United States Congress itself. And so while it's easy, you're gonna be under attack. I mean, I was regularly attacked. And it's devolved to an even greater level. I'm counting on you to lift it up. Melanie.
Hi, I'm Melanie Kalla. I'm a first year at Claremont McKenna College. Thank you so much for attending this event and sharing your guys' knowledge and advice with us. So you guys talked about the American dream, equal opportunity, how that was both of your guys' goal. And a lot of POC students and people in general, to put it nicely, feel discouraged when they don't see themselves in politics, and they feel as if they'll never have the connections or power to be politically successful. So what advice would you give POC who want to pursue politics given our current reality?
Go ahead.
So I'll never forget one of the times, so Montana has 7 tribal nations. And I was shortly after I was elected governor, I was at the Fort Belknap Business Council. That's their tribal government. And one of the council members started more or less scolding me about what happened 150 years ago. And I got all frustrated. I'm like, I can't solve what happened 150 years ago. I can only deal in today. And another council member afterwards wisely said to me, well, if you don't understand what happened 150 years ago, you're never going to be able to address the challenges of today. And I think that, look, in 2021, we've made incredible gains. But if I talk about that fair shot for every single person, right? Not everybody starts at the same level. And there have been systemic and institutional challenges to make that true, or to make that actually a reality. There's at least one day every 2 years where we're stronger than any corporation or any special interests, and that's on election day, because our vote really is our voice. And that vote and voice can make a difference. And that's one of the things we were talking about at our table before coming in here, that how great it was in the 2020 elections that more people of color recognized that part of the way to get there is to engage. And that's how we change the system. Now, whether you're 18 years old or 55, sometimes the system doesn't change quickly enough. And the institutions don't change quickly enough. But our choice is to say, whatever's broken, we can sit on the sidelines and just let it be broken and be upset about it, or we can engage. And I think that we are seeing stronger voices than we have in the past, which is a great thing. And even adding the two of those questions, the first question together is, yeah, there are parts of getting engaged in the system that stinks. But you'll have those moments where someone will walk up to you and not engage in politics and talk about what getting health care did for their family, or moments of economic opportunity. So I guess the long way to say is there's a lot to be frustrated about, but even if we look over the last handful of years, for people of color and for many marginalized communities, we're also seeing some real progress, and just don't give up because of the pace of that progress.
And I would add to that what you're doing, your presence right here tonight, is part of that process itself. So Steve and I have talked about, we want student input on who's going to be the next recipient of the Civility Award. So as you look at Washington, D.C., or other levels of government, at people who are doing what Governor Bullock has done, I think that you should help be involved in that process. That will get you involved. And then, of course, we have, one of the things that we've had with the roundtable are internships, fellowships, scholarships. We want people to be able to get more engaged and involved in that, because, I mean, I do believe that this is going to be a very, very important aspect. Even if you don't choose to get into public service yourself, it's going to be a very important aspect of your overall liberal arts education.
Thank you so much.
You bet, Melanie.
Thank you so much for all of the wonderful questions. At this point, we're going to take one Zoom questions and then another couple or one from the crowd, just to be respectful to everyone's time. Thank you so much.
Yes, so a question from a Zoom audience member is, discourse, to some extent, is only as good as the medium in which it occurs. Any words of encouragement or wisdom on how to navigate discourse in 2021 in new media and old media?
Go ahead. I mean, I've been in that business for the last several years. It's tough, not in social media, but I will tell you that dealing with print and electronic media it's not terribly easy, and it's a very difficult, very competitive industry. But go ahead.
Yeah, look, when I was at Claremont, there was this thing called the Fairness Doctrine. And it had been around since like 1949 till 1987. It said for television, right, if you have a broadcast license, you have to actually, when you present issues of controversy, it has to be equitable, fair, somewhat honest. Well, that's gone in this media environment. I don't think we'll ever get back to regulating. I think in some ways, some of the litigation that we've seen might actually do some reform. It's hard to have reasoned discussion when you have a 24-hour news cycle and you're supposed to tweet immediately right after something occurs. And even print media, if you go into most of their offices, have a big screen up showing how many clicks occurred. So it's right.
Yep,
it's a
absolutely
clickbait.
In every newsroom.
So, to the extent that there's a way to navigate it, it's first continuing to be true to yourself and trying to actually be a constructive part of the system, even in a time where that may not always be what will incentivize behavior. And then I think we do have to figure out how to, this isn't like the thought police, but how to get to something that news is a little bit more than entertainment, and somehow a degree of disinformation is held accountable.
I would just add to that this gets to the issue of deliberation. When Steve said you're immediately expected to tweet right after an event, when I go to Professor Fortner's class next Tuesday, we're going to be talking about deliberative representative democracy. You know, one of the things that was proposed years ago, and I'm sure there's probably pressure on it today, is, especially since we do so much remotely, why should members of Congress have to, go and be on the floor of the Congress? We right now have proxy voting because of COVID. I used to fight that because as technology was moving, they said, let people cast the votes from sitting in their offices in their states. And I said, no. I considered the floor of the Congress to be like a sanctuary, which is independent of all of those outside forces. In fact, I used to fight even having devices. I mean, I wouldn't anymore, but you remember that, Jack, when you were there. I mean, you weren't allowed to have telephones. You'd have to go back to the cloakroom to a telephone. So I think that that's all part of this whole notion of deliberation. So when it comes to the media, the fact that we have to have an instantaneous response to everything undermines the framers' vision for representative democracy. And they basically all of them talked about the problems of direct democracy and how serious that is, and yet we're constantly moving forward. And in the media, this direct democracy is something that I think is playing a role in undermining the kind of responsible, thoughtful response to public policy questions that we've got.
Congressman Dreier, Governor Bullock, and Professor Pitney, thank you for being here tonight. My name is Ryan. I'm a freshman here at CMC, and my question was for Governor Bullock. Earlier, you had mentioned that you really valued our two-party system, and given the serious lack of cooperation we see between the two parties today, why should myself and everyone else at CMC be excited or even willing to get involved with this system that often seems so broken?
Well, I value it in as much as that not unlike your classes, sometimes a robust debate and discussion is what can elevate things a little bit higher, both at a macro level and individual clarity for oneself. Now, even like, you can go back to a guy named Mo Udall ran for president in 1976. Congressman from Arizona. He said, you know, when Democrats organize in a firing squad, we usually do it in a circle, right? We're really good at shooting them one another. And there's always going to be dysfunction among the parties to a degree, but there's also opportunity there. And I think why you should continue to be part of it is to say, all right, what's broken? If it's the media that's broken, if it's campaign finance, if it's something else, it ain't going to fix itself. Elected officials and politicians are in kind of, right, we exaggerate, we're full of hyperbole. I do think it's a challenging time in this 240-year experiment called representative democracy. And I think it is important, what the congressman had said is that, look, we can say it's so broken it's not worth being part of. Or we can say that it may be broken in some areas, but it's so important for what this country, what the promise could be, that instead of disengaging and saying it's too broken, you're double downing, if you will, if that's a word, and saying, I can be a part of fixing it. Because that's what it takes, right? Nobody's going to take any of you and say, all right, you are selected to run or to be on a campaign. But it can also be some of the most fulfilling things you can ever do, be it working in politics or running for office. And I hope that the moment that we're in doesn't make any of you think, well, there's no reason to be part of it. Hopefully it'll inspire you to say, it could be a heck of a lot better than what it is, and my voice ought to be a part of it.
And let me say that, and I know I speak for Governor Bullock when I say this, there is no greater beneficiary of your public service than you. Even if you're not a crook, there's no greater beneficiary of your public service than you. I was tilting at windmills when I was in Phillips Hall, and I ran for Congress. And you know, the point is, and lots of people said that it was absolutely impossible to do that. And so Steve just mentioned Mo Udall, and I've got to say that he wrote a book called Too Funny to Be President. And he had lots of great lines in there. He was in Nashua, New Hampshire, and walked into a barber shop. He looked to the barber and said, "Hi, I'm Mo Udall and running for president." The barber looked at him and said, "Yeah, we were just laughing about that this morning." He also said, the difference between a cactus and a caucus is that with a cactus, the pricks are on the outside. That was another one of his great lines. And I can sort of devolve down from there. But I will say that there is a societal responsibility that you as CMCers have. I truly believe that, just by virtue of your being here. And I also want to recognize Professor Ward Elliott, who's been such an inspiration to me and so many others. So stand up and be recognized, Ward. And it's professors like Ward Elliott who have played a role, and of course we've bragged all over Professor Pitney, our teacher here. But begin to work with your colleague. I know that Professor Fortner is going to be phenomenal. I've gotten to know him just in the last several weeks, and he's come from New York, and I asked him, what's the biggest surprise about coming to California? And guess what it was? He said, all these little lizards I see running around here. So I'm really looking forward to being in Professor Fortner's class. Get to work with your professors. And I will tell you that just as Governor Bullock and I have, they will encourage you to do this as well. And they know what a responsibility that you all now have.
Thank you.
Thank you.